The sheriff knocked twice, not 3 times, which was the standard knock of a man conducting official business, not once, which was the knock of a neighbor or a friend. Twice. 2 slow, deliberate knocks with a pause between them that lasted exactly the length of time it takes a man to decide whether he wants to hear the answer. Declan Rowe was sitting at his kitchen table mending a leather boot when the knocks came. He set the boot down. He set the awl down. He looked at the cellar door, which was closed and bolted from the kitchen side with a heavy iron slide bolt he had installed 3 months ago when the cellar had stopped being a cellar and started being something else. Below the cellar door, 12 feet down, in a space that had once held nothing but potatoes and onions and jars of preserved apples, a woman was breathing. He could not hear her breathing from the kitchen. The cellar was too deep, and the door was too thick. But he knew she was breathing because she had been breathing down there for 91 days, and he had brought her food every morning and water every evening and a clean chamber pot every 3rd day. And in 91 days, she had not missed a single breath, and Declan Rowe had learned to feel the presence of another person in his house the way a man feels the presence of a fire in a stove, by the warmth that comes through the walls even when you cannot see the flame. The sheriff knocked twice again. Declan stood up. He walked to the front door. He opened it. Sheriff Brogan Fell stood on the porch in his gray wool coat, with the brass star pinned at his chest, and his wide-brimmed hat in his left hand and his right hand resting on the butt of the pistol at his belt, which was where his right hand always rested, because Brogan Fell was a man who had been sheriff of Dunmore County for 22 years, and had learned that the hand on the pistol was a conversation that happened before the conversation. He was 55 years old, heavy in the shoulders, with a thick gray mustache, small sharp blue eyes, and a face that had been set in the same expression for so long that the expression had become the face. Declan. Sheriff, may I come in? It was not a question. The grammar was a question, but the tone was not. Declan stepped aside. The sheriff walked into the kitchen. He did not look at the cellar door. He looked at the table, at the boot, at the awl, at the tin cup of cold tea. He looked at the window above the basin. He looked at the coat rack by the door, where Declan's heavy winter coat hung beside a second coat that was not Declan's size, and that was, in fact, too small for any man and too large for any child. The sheriff looked at the second coat for a long time. Declan watched him look at it. "That coat," the sheriff said, "my late mother's." "Your mother was a small woman." "She was." "She has been dead 9 years." "She has." "You kept her coat for 9 years." "I'm sentimental." The sheriff turned and looked at Declan. His small, sharp blue eyes did the thing they did when Brogan Fell was deciding how much truth to demand from a man he had known for 30 years. He had known Declan Rowe since Declan was 8 years old and had been caught stealing apples from the Mercer orchard and had been brought to the sheriff's office by old Mercer himself, and had stood in front of a younger version of Brogan Fell, and had lied with such absolute conviction that Fell had almost believed him. Almost. Fell had not believed an 8-year-old boy, and he did not believe a 41-year-old man. But he had let the boy go with a warning, and he was, Declan understood, deciding right now whether to let the man go with a warning too. "Declan, I am going to tell you something, and I am going to ask you to listen carefully." "I am listening." "There is a rumor in the village. The rumor is that a man in the southern part of the valley is harboring an orc. The rumor does not name the man. The rumor does not describe the orc. The rumor is vague in the way that rumors are vague when the people spreading them want to say something without being responsible for having said it. I have heard this rumor from 3 separate sources in the last 2 weeks. 2 of those sources are people whose rumors I do not generally trust. The third is a person whose rumors I trust entirely. Declan did not speak. The sheriff continued, I have a duty. My duty is to investigate rumors of unlawful harboring. The territorial ordinance is clear. Harboring an undocumented orc carries a fine of 50 silvers and possible imprisonment. I am sworn to enforce the ordinance. I have enforced it 11 times in 22 years. I did not enjoy any of those 11 times, but I did them because that is what the badge requires. He paused. I am standing in your kitchen, Declan. I knocked twice. I did not knock 3 times. Do you understand what that means? Declan understood. 3 knocks was official business. 3 knocks meant the sheriff was acting in his capacity as sheriff and that everything that followed was on the record and could be used in a magistrate's court. 2 knocks was something else. 2 knocks was Brogan Fell standing in a kitchen as a man, not as a badge, telling another man something he needed to hear before the badge came back. I understand. Good. Then I will tell you what I came to tell you. There will be an official search of the Southern Valley in 2 weeks. The magistrate has authorized it. I will be conducting the search with 2 deputies. We will search every house, every barn, every cellar, every outbuilding, from the crossroads to the river. The search will be thorough because the magistrate has ordered it to be thorough, and because one of the 3 sources of the rumor was the magistrate's own wife, who heard it at the church social from a woman named Delia Court, who lives a quarter-mile from your property, and who has been watching your house with the particular attention that Delia Court gives to anything she does not understand. Declan closed his eyes briefly. Delia Court? Of course. Delia Court was the kind of neighbor who counted the number of times a man went to his root cellar in a week and noticed when the number changed. 2 weeks, Declan said. 2 weeks. The search begins on the Monday after next. I will start at the crossroads and work south, which means I will reach your property by Wednesday. You have until Wednesday. Until Wednesday to do what? The sheriff looked at him. Until Wednesday to make sure that when I search your cellar, the only thing I find in it is potatoes and onions and jars of preserved apples. What you do between now and Wednesday is your business. I am not advising you. I am not helping you. I am telling you a fact about my schedule. What you do with that fact is entirely up to you. Declan looked at the sheriff for a long moment. Why? Brogan Fell put his hat back on his head. He adjusted it carefully, the way a man adjusts a hat when he wants to be doing something with his hands that is not answering a question. Because I knocked twice, Declan, not 3 times. Because I have known you since you were 8 years old, and you lied to me about the apples, and I let you go home to your mother. And because your mother was a good woman who would have wanted me to knock twice instead of 3 times. And because I am 55 years old and I have 11 searches on my record that I am not proud of, and I do not want a 12th. He walked to the door. He stopped. 2 weeks, Wednesday, that is all I came to say. Good afternoon, Declan. Good afternoon, Sheriff. Brogan Fell walked out of the house and down the porch steps and across the yard to where his horse was tied at the fence. He mounted. He rode north toward the crossroads without looking back. Declan stood in the doorway and watched him go. Then he closed the door. He walked to the cellar door. He slid the bolt. He opened the door. He climbed down the ladder. The cellar was dark, except for the small oil lamp that burned on a shelf in the corner. The space was 10 feet by 12, with stone walls and a packed earth floor and a low ceiling that Declan could touch with his hand if he raised his arm. Along one wall were the potato sacks and the onion baskets and the jars of preserved apples that had been there before the cellar had become something else. Along the other wall, behind a hanging blanket that served as a curtain, was a narrow cot with a straw mattress and 2 wool blankets and a small wooden crate that served as a bedside table. On the crate was a tin cup of water, a small leather-bound book, and a stub of pencil. On the cot, sitting cross-legged with the blanket pulled around her shoulders, was a woman with bright green skin and dark eyes and short black hair and the particular stillness of a person who had heard every word of the conversation above her head and was now waiting to find out what it meant. Her name was Fael. She was 29 years old. She had been in the cellar for 91 days. She spoke first. 2 weeks. You heard. The walls are thick, but the floor is not. I have heard every footstep and every conversation in that kitchen for 3 months. I heard the sheriff's horse before you heard his knock. Declan sat on the bottom rung of the ladder. He did not come further into the space because the space was small, and he had learned in 3 months that Fael valued the distance between his side of the cellar and her side of the cellar, and that maintaining that distance was one of the small dignities she had constructed for herself in a life that had not offered many. What do you want to do? Fael thought about this. She thought about it the way she thought about everything, which was slowly and completely and without any visible sign that she was thinking at all. Declan had learned to wait for her. He had learned that Fael's silences were not empty. They were full of the kind of careful processing that a person does when every decision she has made for the last 4 years has had consequences she could not afford to get wrong. I cannot stay in the cellar, she said. No, I cannot stay on the property. The search will be thorough. The sheriff said so. Even if the cellar is clean, the deputies will look at the property and they will see the things Delia Court has seen, the extra trips to the cellar, the second plate at the basin, the coat on the rack. I know. Where can I go? Declan had been thinking about this since the sheriff's horse had disappeared around the bend in the road. He had been thinking about it before that. In the slow background way he had been thinking about all of Fael's problems since the night she had arrived at his door in a rainstorm 91 days ago, soaked and shaking and holding one arm at an angle that suggested it was broken and saying the only words she had the strength to say, which were, I need to hide. One night. I will leave before dawn. She had not left before dawn. The arm had been broken. Declan had said it because he had set broken bones on livestock before, and the principle was the same. The setting had taken 3 hours because the bone was bad, and Fael had not cried during any of it. She had bitten down on a leather strap and sweated and shaken and not made a sound, and Declan had understood by the end of the 3 hours that whatever she was running from was worse than a broken arm set by a farmer with no training. She had stayed. 1 night had become 1 week. 1 week had become 1 month. 1 month had become 3. The arm had healed. The rest had not. Fael had told him the story in pieces over the 3 months. She had been a weaver in a small mixed village in the eastern hills. The village had been raided by a territorial militia acting on orders from a lord whose name Fael refused to say because she believed that saying his name was a form of giving him power he did not deserve. The weavers had been taken. Most had been sold at markets along the eastern road. Fael had been sold 3 times. The third buyer had been a man named Howell, who ran a leather workshop in a town 2 days' ride north of Declan's Valley. Howell had not been interested in weaving. Howell had been interested in other things. Fael had escaped from Howell's workshop 4 months ago by climbing out a window during a rainstorm while Howell slept. She had walked south for a month. She had broken her arm falling from a rock face while trying to cross a river in the dark. She had walked for 3 more weeks with a broken arm before she had arrived at Declan's door. Declan had listened to all of this. He had not asked follow-up questions about Howell because the follow-up questions answered themselves. He had simply listened and fed her and emptied the chamber pot and brought her the small leather-bound book and the pencil, because she had said on the 12th day that she could write, and that writing was the only thing that kept her from going mad in the dark. "I have been thinking," Declan said. "There is a man I know. His name is Coogan. He lives 4 days' ride to the northwest, in the hill country past the Ashburn River. He is a trapper. He lives alone. He does not like the law, and the law does not like him. He has a cabin that is so far from any road that no sheriff has visited it in 11 years. He owes me a favor because I lent him my best mule 6 years ago when his own mule died and he had no way to get his winter furs to market. He never returned the mule. He has been feeling guilty about the mule for 6 years. This is a man who can be asked to do a thing and who will do it because he has been waiting 6 years for the chance to settle the debt of a borrowed mule. You want to send me to a stranger's cabin. I want to ride you to a stranger's cabin. 4 days there, 4 days back. We leave tomorrow night. We travel at night because Delia Court does not watch the road at night. We arrive at Coogan's cabin before the search begins. You stay with Coogan until the search is over and until I can figure out the next step." "What is the next step?" "I do not know yet. I know the first step. The first step is that you are not in my cellar on Wednesday when the sheriff comes with his deputies. Everything after that is a problem for a man who is not solving a problem at 2 o'clock in the morning in a root cellar." Fael looked at him. "Declan Rowe." "Fael, you have kept me in your cellar for 3 months. You have fed me every morning. You have brought me water every evening. You have emptied my chamber pot every 3rd day without complaint. You set my broken arm with livestock tools and did not flinch when the bone shifted. You brought me a book and a pencil because I told you I could write. And now you're going to ride me 4 days through the hills in the dark to a trapper's cabin because a sheriff knocked twice instead of 3 times and gave you 11 days to make a choice. Why? Because 91 days ago you came to my door in a rainstorm with a broken arm, and you said one night, and I said all right, and neither of us has said anything since then about the fact that one night became 91 nights, and that the arrangement has been, on balance, the least lonely I have been in a very long time." She did not say anything for a moment. Then she said, "The least lonely?" "The least lonely. I live alone. I have lived alone for 8 years since my wife passed. I have not been lonely in the way that people usually mean when they say lonely. I have been lonely in a different way. I have been lonely for the sound of another person breathing in the house. The floor above you is thin enough that I can hear you breathing at night when the house is quiet. I have been sleeping better in the last 3 months than I have slept in 8 years because there is someone breathing in the house. Fail was very still. You have been sleeping better because I am in your cellar? Yes, that is the strangest thing anyone has ever said to me. I know. It is also the kindest. They left the next night. Declan saddled his best horse, the tall bay gelding he kept for long rides. He packed saddlebags with food for 8 days, blankets, a small medical kit, a lantern, and the leather-bound book and pencil, because Fail had said she would not leave without them. Fail wore the coat from the rack, the one the sheriff had looked at, the one that was not Declan's mother's coat. It was a coat Declan had bought for Fail at the village market 6 weeks ago, telling the merchant it was a gift for a cousin. The coat was dark gray wool, long-sleeved with a hood, and it fit Fail well. They rode out at midnight. They took the back trail that went behind Declan's property and up through the ridge that separated his valley from the hill country to the northwest. The trail was narrow and dark and not used by anyone except deer and the occasional hunter. Delia Court's property was 2 miles to the east. Delia Court was asleep. They rode for 4 nights. During the days they camped in dense forest off the trail, taking turns sleeping while the other kept watch. They spoke more in those 4 days than they had spoken in 91 days in the house. Fael told him about weaving. She told him about the looms of the eastern hills, which were different from the looms the human weavers used, wider and with a different tensioning system that allowed the orc weavers to produce cloth of a tightness and durability that human looms could not match. She told him about her mother, who had taught her the trade, and about her grandmother, who had been the master weaver of their village and who had died before the raid and had therefore been spared the knowledge of what had happened to her people. She told him about the leather-bound book, which she had been using to write a record of everything she remembered about the weaving techniques of her village, because she was the last weaver of her line, and the techniques would die with her if she did not write them down. She had filled 37 pages in 3 months. Declan told her about his wife Ellie, who had been a quiet woman with a loud laugh and who had died of a wasting illness that had taken 8 months to finish what it started. He told her about the 8 years after, which had been years of work and silence and the gradual disappearance of the sound of another person in the house, which was a sound you did not realize you needed until it was gone. They arrived at Coogan's cabin on the morning of the 4th day. Coogan was a barrel-shaped man of 60 with a white beard and the suspicious eyes of a man who had been living outside the law long enough that every visitor was a potential problem until proven otherwise. He saw Declan. He saw Fail. He looked at Declan for a long moment. This about the mule. This is about the mule. Come in. Coogan's cabin was small but clean and warm. He had a stove and a bed and a second room he used for curing furs. He listened while Declan explained the situation. He did not ask questions. When Declan was done, Coogan nodded. She stays. I have the room. Nobody comes up here. The sheriff of whatever county this technically belongs to has not visited in 11 years, and I intend to keep it that way. She can stay as long as she needs to stay. Declan looked at Fael. Fael looked at the cabin. She looked at Coogan. She looked at Declan. How long? Until the search is over and until I can make a more permanent arrangement. A few weeks, maybe a month. And then? And then we figure out the next thing. The way we have been figuring out every next thing for the last 3 months. Fael nodded. She did not cry. She had not cried once in 91 days. She set the leather-bound book on the small table in the fur-curing room, and she put the pencil beside it, and she sat down on the narrow cot that Coogan had made up for her, and she looked at Declan with those dark eyes that he had first seen in the light of a rainstorm through a cracked-open door, and she said, "Come back. I will come back. Promise." "I promise." Declan rode south. He arrived home 2 days before the search. He cleaned the cellar. He removed the cot and the blankets and the wooden crate. He scrubbed the floor. He replaced the potatoes and onions and apple jars in their original positions. He took the second coat off the rack and put it in his bedroom closet. He washed the second plate and put it back in the cabinet. He made the kitchen look like the kitchen of a man who lived alone, which was what the kitchen had looked like for 8 years before Fael, and what it looked like now, except that it was emptier, in a way that Declan felt in his chest. The sheriff came on Wednesday as promised. He came with 2 deputies. They searched the house. They searched the barn. They searched the cellar. The sheriff spent a long time in the cellar. He looked at the potatoes. He looked at the onions. He looked at the apple jars. He tapped the walls. He checked the floor. He found nothing because there was nothing to find. He climbed back up the ladder. He looked at Declan. "Nothing here." "Nothing here, Sheriff." The sheriff nodded. He looked at the coat rack by the door. There was 1 coat on the rack. 1 coat. The sheriff looked at it. He looked at Declan. He put his hat on. "Good afternoon, Declan." "Good afternoon, Sheriff." Brogan Fell walked out. He mounted his horse. He rode north. Declan stood in the doorway and watched him go, and then he closed the door and sat at the kitchen table and put his head in his hands for a long time, because the house was quiet and the cellar was empty, and the sound of another person breathing was gone. He waited 2 weeks. He waited because waiting was the safe thing to do, and because Coogan had provisions for a month, and because Fael was safe, and because the search had to be seen to be complete before Declan could make a move without drawing attention. On the 15th day after the search, he saddled the bay and rode northwest through the hills. He arrived at Coogan's cabin on the evening of the 4th day. Fael was sitting on the porch of the cabin with the leather-bound book open on her knees and the pencil in her hand, and the last light of the day falling across the pages. She looked up when she heard the horse. She set the book down. She stood up. Declan dismounted. He walked to the porch. He stood at the bottom of the steps and looked up at her. "The search is over. They found nothing. The sheriff has moved on. Delia Court has been told by the magistrate that the rumors were unfounded, and that she should direct her attention to her own property." Fael nodded. "And now?" "And now I have been thinking. I have been thinking for 15 days. I have been thinking about the cellar and the house and the breathing and the coat on the rack and the fact that my kitchen has looked wrong for 2 weeks because there is 1 plate in the basin instead of 2. What have you been thinking?" "I have been thinking that the cellar is not the answer. The cellar was the first answer. It was the answer I had when I had no time and a woman with a broken arm on my doorstep." But it is not the answer anymore. The answer is the house. The answer is a room with a window and a door, and a bolt on the inside, and a bed and a desk, where you can write in the leather-bound book by daylight instead of lamplight. The answer is the second plate in the basin, and the second coat on the rack, and the sound of breathing in the house at night. Phil looked at him from the top of the porch steps. "You are asking me to come back." "I am asking you to come home." She was silent for a long moment. The evening light was fading behind the trees. Coogan was somewhere inside the cabin, pretending not to listen, which was what Coogan did when he was listening. "Home," she said. The word came out of her the way a word comes out when a person has not had a reason to use it in a very long time and is testing whether it still works. Home. Yes. She came down the steps. She picked up the leather-bound book from the porch rail where she had set it. She held it against her chest with both green hands. She nodded once. "Take me home." They rode south together the next morning. Coogan stood on his porch and watched them go and called after Declan, "That settles the mule row." Declan waved back without turning. The ride home took 4 days. They traveled by daylight this time because the search was over and the road was safe, and because Fael said she wanted to see the country she had ridden through in the dark 4 weeks ago. The country was green. The spring had come while she was at Coogan's cabin, and the hills were alive with the particular shade of green that the valley took on in April, which was not the green of Fael's skin, but which was close enough that Declan thought about saying something about it, and then did not, because some observations were better left as thoughts. They arrived at the farm on the evening of the 4th day. The house was where they had left it. The cellar was where they had left it. The kitchen table was where they had left it. But Declan did not take Fael to the cellar. He took her upstairs, to the room at the end of the hall that had been his wife Ellie's sewing room for 12 years, and that had been empty for 8 years, and that had a window that looked out over the valley, and a bed that Declan had made up with fresh linens the morning he had left to ride north. He opened the door. "This is your room. The bolt is on the inside. The window opens. There is a desk by the window where the light is good for writing. There is a hook on the wall for your coat. You are not in a cellar. You're in a house. You are home." Fael walked into the room. She set the leather-bound book on the desk. She walked to the window. She looked out at the valley, at the green hills rolling down to the river, at the evening light turning gold on the fields. She had not seen a view from a window in 4 months. She stood there for a long time. Then she said, without turning, "The breathing. What about it? You said you slept better because you could hear me breathing through the floor. This room is on the same floor as yours. You will not be able to hear me through the floor any more. I know. You will be able to hear me through the wall." Declan smiled. "I know." The lesson was not in the cellar or the sheriff's 2 knocks or the 4-day ride through the dark hills to a trapper's cabin. It was in the 15 days of an empty house after the search, when a man who had been listening to breathing through a thin floor for 3 months discovered that the silence was worse than the risk. It was in the moment he saddled the horse and rode north, not because the danger had passed, but because the alternative, which was the quiet kitchen with 1 plate in the basin, was a kind of danger he was no longer willing to live with. Sometimes the most important thing a person can do is knock twice instead of 3 times. And sometimes the most important thing is to ride 4 days in the dark to bring someone home, and then ride 4 days in the daylight to bring them home again. Did you enjoy the story? Subscribe to the channel to watch more stories like this one. Leave a like. It helps the channel a lot. And drop a comment down below. I always read them and use your feedback to make our content better. Thanks so much. The Orc Keeper.